I know everything. Jenna's body stiffened like I'd slapped her. Her hand clutched the strap of her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white, and her eyes darted to the phone in my hand, its screen still glowing with damning evidence. Mark, she said softly, the start of a lie already bubbling up. What are you talking about? I took a slow step toward her, tilting the phone so she could get a better view. The words on the screen, her words, might as well have been carved into my skull. I'd read them so many times they were seared into my memory. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Don't bother, I said, my voice a low, sharp blade. You're not talking your way out of this. She didn't deny it. That was the worst part. No immediate protests, no declarations of love or fidelity, just the silence of a person caught red-handed. And I wasn't about to let her off the hook. You've been sleeping with Tyler, I said flatly, the words hanging in the air like a guillotine blade. Jenna's face twisted into something between guilt and panic. It's not what you think, she whispered. Oh, I barked out a laugh, bitter and humorless. Then enlighten me, Jenna. What exactly is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like my wife has been screwing my brother. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. It just happened, Mark. It was a mistake. A mistake. I slammed the phone onto the counter, the sound reverberating through the kitchen. A mistake is spilling coffee on your shirt, Jenna. Sleeping with my brother is a choice. Multiple choices, actually. Over and over again. She flinched, but I was too far gone to care. How long? I demanded. Her eyes flicked away from mine. Mark. How long? There was a beat of silence before she finally answered, her voice barely audible. 6 months. 6 months. Half a year. I felt like the floor had been yanked out from under me. I stepped back, running a hand through my hair as the realization settled in. 6 months, I repeated, as if saying it out loud would make it make sense. Didn't. And what? You just expected me not to find out? To keep playing the doting husband while you snuck around behind my back? It wasn't like that, she pleaded, taking a step toward me. I backed away, holding up a hand to stop her. Don't, I warned. Don't you dare try to make this seem less disgusting than it is. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. Does he know I know? I asked coldly. She shook her head. Good. I turned away, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. The rage boiling inside me was so intense I thought I might explode. Mark, please, she said, her voice breaking. I love you. It didn't mean anything. It's you I want to be with. I laughed again, sharp and bitter. Right? You love me. That's why you've been screwing Tyler while I've been working overtime to provide for our family. Makes perfect sense. She flinched again, but I wasn't done. Do you even realize what you've done? You didn't just betray me. You destroyed everything. Our marriage. Our family. You couldn't have picked a worse person to do this with, Jenna. My brother. My own blood. She opened her mouth to speak, but at that moment, the front door opened, and Tyler walked in. The room fell into a tense, suffocating silence. Hey man, Tyler said casually, his keys jingling as he set them on the counter. He stopped short when he saw Jenna's tear-streaked face and my expression. What's going on? I turned to him slowly, feeling a cold, deadly calm settle over me. What's going on? I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Is that I just found out you've been sleeping with my wife. Tyler's face drained of color. Mark, don't, I interrupted, taking a step toward him. Don't even try. You're just as pathetic as she is. Look, I'm sorry, he stammered, holding up his hands defensively. I didn't mean for this to happen. Didn't mean for it to happen? I cut him off, my voice rising. You mean you just accidentally slept with my wife? What? You tripped and fell into bed together. Mark, I swear. Shut up, I snapped, pointing a finger at him. You don't get to talk. You don't get to explain. I trusted you. I defended you. And this is how you repay me. Tyler glanced at Jenna, who was sobbing quietly, and then back at me. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I didn't think. That much is clear, I said, cutting him off again. Neither of you thought. You didn't think about me, about Lucas, about anyone but yourselves. Tyler tried to say something else, but I was done listening. I grabbed my keys off the counter and headed for the door. Where are you going? Jenna called after me, panic in her voice. Away from you, I said without looking back. Don't follow me, either of you. I slammed the door behind me and walked to my car, my hands shaking with rage. As I drove away, one thought consumed me. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I spent the night in my car, parked in a deserted lot on the edge of town. Sleep wasn't an option, not with the images of Jenna and Tyler seared into my mind. Every laugh we'd shared, every kiss, every promise she'd made. All of it felt like a lie now. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal. It was the fact that they thought I was too blind, too stupid to ever notice. That smug sense of invincibility they must have felt while sneaking around behind my back. It lit a fire in me that wouldn't be extinguished until they paid for every second of it. By the time the sun crept over the horizon, I had a plan. When I got home, the house was eerily quiet. Jenna was sitting on the couch, her face pale and blotchy from crying. She stood when she saw me, but I held up a hand to stop her. Don't, I said. I'm not interested in whatever apology or excuse you've rehearsed. Mark, please, she started. But I cut her off with a sharp look. Here's how this is going to go, I said, my voice steady and cold. You're going to do exactly what I say, or I swear, Jenna, I'll make sure you regret ever meeting me. Her eyes widened, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I saw fear in them. Good. You want to fix this? I continued, stepping closer. Fine. Start by deleting his number. Right now. She hesitated, glancing at her phone on the coffee table. Do it, I snapped. With shaking hands, she picked up the phone and deleted the contact. But I wasn't stupid enough to think that was the end of it. You're not texting him. You're not calling him. Hell, you're not even thinking about him, I said, my voice like ice. If I catch you so much as looking in his direction, this marriage is over. She nodded quickly, tears streaming down her face. And Tyler, I added, smirking slightly. Don't worry, I'll handle him. I waited 2 days before confronting Tyler. I wanted him to think I'd calmed down, that I might let him off the hook. The truth was, I wanted him to sweat. When I finally showed up at his apartment, he looked like he hadn't slept since our last encounter. Mark, he said, his voice wary as he opened the door. I didn't think you'd. Save it, I interrupted, pushing past him into the living room. We need to talk. He shut the door and turned to face me, his hands shoved into his pockets. Look, man, I'm sorry. I screwed up. Okay? I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But you're right, I said, cutting him off. You don't deserve it. And you're not going to get it. His face fell, but I wasn't finished. Here's what's going to happen, I said, stepping closer. You're going to stay the hell away from Jenna. No texts, no calls, no accidental run-ins. Nothing. Got it. He nodded quickly, but I leaned in, lowering my voice to a dangerous whisper. If you so much as breathe in her direction, Tyler, I will destroy you. And don't think I'm bluffing. You know I can do it. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing, and nodded again. Good, I said, stepping back, because I'm not in the mood for games. For the next few weeks, I played the perfect husband. I brought Jenna flowers, cooked dinner, and acted like I was slowly warming up to the idea of forgiveness. She ate it up, desperate to believe that we could move past what she'd done. But behind the scenes, I was working to dismantle everything she and Tyler had built. Started small. I accidentally let it slip to Tyler's boss that he'd been partying a little too hard lately. The man was already on thin ice at work, so it didn't take much to nudge him toward suspension. Next, I went through Jenna's phone records and found the names of her closest friends. A few anonymous messages about her affair, complete with screenshots of her texts, were enough to turn them against her. Suddenly, she wasn't getting invited to brunch or book club anymore. And then there was the final piece of the puzzle, Lucas. I couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't add up. The timing of his birth, the way Tyler and Jenna both looked at him. It gnawed at me until I couldn't ignore it anymore. So I ordered a DNA test. It was easy enough. A quick swab from Lucas's cheek while Jenna was in the shower, and the kit was in the mail the next day. When the results came back, I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity. Not a match. My hands trembled as I closed the email, my mind racing. Lucas wasn't mine. He was Tyler's. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, betrayal, relief, but above all, a sick sense of satisfaction. This was the final nail in the coffin. The proof I needed to destroy them both. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen where Jenna was sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. She looked up and smiled hesitantly. "What's up?" she asked, her voice light, as if we were a normal couple again. I set the DNA test results on the counter in front of her. "What's this?" she asked, frowning as she picked up the paper. I didn't say a word. I just watched as her eyes scanned the page, her expression shifting from confusion to horror. "Mark, I can explain," she started, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Don't bother," I said coldly. "You've done enough explaining. Now it's my turn." Her face crumpled as I laid out my plans, each word cutting her down like a blade. By the time I was done, she was sobbing uncontrollably, and I felt nothing but satisfaction. This was only the beginning. Jenna sat frozen at the kitchen table, staring at the DNA test results. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. I leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, and watched her break. It was almost poetic. "Mark," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's not what you think." I raised an eyebrow, the laugh bubbling in my chest sharp and bitter. "Not what I think?" I repeated. "Jenna, the paper literally says Lucas isn't mine. What else am I supposed to think?" She buried her face in her hands, her sobs muffled but unmistakable. For a moment, I just stood there, letting her cry. And then, just as I felt the tiniest flicker of pity, she looked up and said the one thing that erased it completely. "I didn't know," she whispered. I blinked. "You didn't know?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I swear, Mark, I thought he was yours. I never—" Her voice cracked. "I never wanted it to be this way." The sheer audacity of it almost left me speechless. "So let me get this straight," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You slept with my brother repeatedly? And when you got pregnant, it just didn't occur to you that the baby might not be mine? I thought it was over," she cried, clutching the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "By the time I found out I was pregnant, Tyler and I had stopped, and I didn't think." "You didn't think?" I snapped, cutting her off. "That seems to be a recurring theme with you, Jenna." She flinched, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "What about him?" I asked, my voice colder than ever. "Does Tyler know?" Her head shot up, her eyes wide with panic. No, he doesn't. Please, Mark, you can't tell him." I tilted my head, studying her. "Why not?" "Because—" She hesitated, clearly scrambling for the right words. "Because it'll ruin everything. For Lucas. For us." "There is no us, Jenna," I interrupted, my voice like a whip. "Not anymore. Whatever shred of trust one had left is gone. You and Tyler destroyed that the moment you decided my loyalty was worth less than your what? Your momentary boredom? Your twisted need for attention." She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't give her the chance. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, leaning forward so we were eye to eye. "You're going to pack a bag and leave. Today. I don't care where you go. Tyler's place, a hotel, the moon, but you're not staying here." Her face crumpled. "Mark, please. Lucas. Lucas isn't my son," I said flatly, cutting her off again. "I've been raising someone else's child for 6 years, Jenna. That's over now." She broke into fresh sobs, but I felt nothing. No sympathy. No regret. Pack your things? I repeated, my voice cold and firm. You have until noon. She left quietly, her suitcase rolling behind her as Lucas clung to her leg. The sight of him tore at something deep inside me, but I forced myself to stay rooted in the doorway. He wasn't mine. I had to keep reminding myself of that. Why can't we stay, Daddy? He asked, his big, tearful eyes looking up at me. I swallowed hard, forcing the lump in my throat down. You're going with Mommy for a little while, buddy, I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. But why? He pressed. Because. I hesitated, my chest tightening. Because that's what's best for now. Jenna looked at me, her eyes pleading, but I shut the door before she could say a word. I spent the next few days cleaning out the house, stripping away every trace of Jenna and Tyler. The wedding photos went in the trash, the anniversary gifts in the donation box. It was almost cathartic, turning the life we'd built together into nothing more than garbage. But the rage still simmered beneath the surface, refusing to fade. Jenna's betrayal had been bad enough, but Tyler's? That was unforgivable. So I decided it was time for him to face the consequences. When I showed up at Tyler's apartment, he looked like he'd aged 10 years in a week. He opened the door cautiously, his eyes darting behind me like he expected Jenna to be there. She's not here, I said, pushing past him into the living room. He shut the door and turned to face me, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. What do you want, Mark? I pulled a folded piece of paper from my jacket and tossed it onto the coffee table. He frowned, picking it up and unfolding it. What's this? He asked, scanning the page. It's a DNA test, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Lucas isn't mine. Tyler's face went pale as he read the results. Jesus Christ, he whispered, sinking onto the couch. I didn't know. Yeah, I said bitterly. That seems to be the running theme around here. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Regret? Guilt? Fear? Probably all three. Mark, I'm sorry, he said, his voice shaking. I never meant for any of this to happen. I swear. Save it, I snapped. I don't want your apologies. I want you out of my life. Permanently. He nodded quickly, his hands trembling as he set the paper down. And don't think for a second that this is over, I added, stepping closer. You ruined my marriage, Tyler. You took my family away from me. So now, I'm going to do the same to you. His eyes widened, but I didn't give him the chance to respond. I turned and walked out the door, slamming it shut behind me. That night, as I sat alone in the empty house, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. The anger, the betrayal, the grief. It was almost too much to bear. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. I was done playing the nice guy. Tyler and Jenna had treated my life like a game, but now it was my turn to make the rules. And the first rule was simple. There would be no mercy. The morning after my confrontation with Tyler, I sent a message to our parents. Just a simple text with a screenshot of the DNA test results attached. Thought you should know who Lucas's real father is. I didn't wait for their response. I knew it would blow up like a grenade. My parents adored Lucas, but they'd be furious at Tyler for betraying me. And Jenna? She wouldn't have a shred of sympathy left. By noon, the family group chat was chaos. Mom, Mark, is this some kind of sick joke? Dad, we need to talk. Now. Tyler, Mark, what the hell are you doing? I ignored the messages and poured myself another cup of coffee, enjoying the silence. By the time I arrived at my parents' house that evening, the air was already thick with tension. Mom was pacing the living room, her face pale and drawn. Dad sat in his usual armchair, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought he might crack a tooth. And Tyler? He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. What's going on? Mom demanded the moment I walked in. Is this true? Lucas is Tyler's son. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. Yep. Mom's hand flew to her mouth as she gasped, tears welling in her eyes. Oh my God. Dad stood, pointing a finger at Tyler. "Is this true?" he barked. Tyler hesitated, glancing between me and our parents. "I didn't know, okay? I swear, I didn't know he was mine." "That's not the point," Dad thundered, his face turning red. "You slept with your brother's wife. Do you have any idea what you've done to this family?" Tyler tried to defend himself, stammering out excuses, but Dad wasn't having it. "You're a disgrace," he spat. "Get out of my house." "Dad, come on. Out." Tyler looked at me, his expression a mix of anger and desperation. I met his gaze with a cold, unflinching stare. "This is your fault," he hissed as he stormed past me. "Sure it is," I replied calmly, watching him leave. The fallout wasn't just limited to family. I made sure to widen the blast radius. First, I posted the DNA test results online, tagging Jenna and Tyler in the post. I didn't say anything, just let the cold, hard truth speak for itself. Within hours, it had gone viral among our friends and acquaintances. The comments poured in. "Oh my God! I can't believe this. Jenna and Tyler? Seriously? That's disgusting. I always knew there was something off about those two." Jenna called me, sobbing and begging me to take the post down. "Please, Mark," she cried. "You're ruining my life." "Funny," I said. "That's exactly what you and Tyler did to me. Consider us even." She tried to argue, but I hung up before she could finish. Next, I turned my attention to Tyler's career. It didn't take much to find out his company had a strict code of conduct policy. A few anonymous emails detailing his affair with a married woman, complete with screenshots, were enough to get the ball rolling. A week later, he was fired. Jenna wasn't spared either. Her social circle turned on her almost immediately. The whispers, the judgmental glances, the sudden lack of invitations. It all piled up until she became a pariah. And Lucas? I'd made it clear that while I couldn't raise him as my son anymore, I wouldn't abandon him completely. I set up a trust fund for him, something to ensure he'd have a future, even if his parents had screwed up his life. The last step was the divorce. Jenna fought me at every turn, trying to salvage what little she could. But I'd been smart. I documented everything, the texts, the emails, the DNA test. In the end, she didn't stand a chance. The judge awarded me the house, the savings, and the bulk of our assets. Jenna was left with barely enough to get by. As I signed the final papers, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, anger, sadness, but above all, a sense of closure. The fallout had left a trail of destruction in its wake. Tyler had lost his job, his family, and his reputation. Jenna was a shadow of the confident woman she'd once been, struggling to rebuild her life from the ashes. And me? I was finally free. That night, as I stood on the back porch of my now empty house, staring up at the stars, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. It wasn't perfect. The scars of their betrayal would always be there, a reminder of what I'd lost. But for the first time in a long time, I knew I was going to be okay. This wasn't the end. It was a new beginning. The day I moved out of the house felt like shedding a skin that had suffocated me for years. The walls that once echoed with laughter and promises now felt like a mausoleum for a life that no longer existed. I wasn't running away. I was making space for something better. The new place was modest. A 2-bedroom apartment in the city, with scuffed hardwood floors and a balcony overlooking a park. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No memories of Jenna or Tyler lingered here. No shadows of betrayal waiting to pounce. The first few weeks were quiet, peaceful even. I threw myself into work, picking up extra hours and diving into projects I'd ignored for too long. It was a welcome distraction, but the emptiness always crept back in when the world went quiet. Lucas was the hardest part. I'd insisted on visitation rights, not because I wanted to keep Jenna in my life, but because Lucas deserved better than to be collateral damage in their mess. He was an innocent kid who didn't ask for any of this. The first time he came to my apartment, he clutched his favorite action figure like it was a lifeline. "Do you like it?" I asked as he wandered through the small space, his wide eyes taking everything in. He nodded, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's different," he said quietly. "Different isn't always bad," I replied, ruffling his hair. We spent the day playing video games and eating pizza, and by the time Jenna came to pick him up, he didn't want to leave. "Why can't I stay with you all the time?" he asked, his small hand gripping mine. I crouched down to his level, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Because right now you need to be with Mommy," I said gently. "But we'll see each other again soon. Okay?" He nodded reluctantly, and as I watched him walk out the door, I made a silent promise to always be there for him, no matter what. Jenna's life, from what I heard, had unraveled even further. She'd moved in with her parents, who weren't shy about voicing their disappointment. Tyler, meanwhile, had skipped town after his firing, leaving a trail of burned bridges and unpaid debts in his wake. I could have reveled in their misery. I could have let it fuel me, let it fester into something toxic. But I didn't. Not anymore. One night, sitting on the balcony with a beer in hand, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was just tired. Tired of carrying the weight of their betrayal. Tired of letting it define me. It was time to let it go. The real turning point came a few months later, at a coffee shop I'd started frequenting. I was flipping through a book, half listening to the hum of conversations around me, when someone tapped my shoulder. "Excuse me," a woman said, her voice warm and polite. "Is this seat taken?" I looked up, startled, and met her eyes. They were kind, with a spark of curiosity that caught me off guard. "No," I said quickly, gesturing for her to sit. She smiled as she slid into the chair across from me, setting her cup down. "Thanks. It's packed in here today." "No problem," I replied, closing my book and trying to ignore the sudden nervous flutter in my chest. We didn't talk much, just a brief exchange about the book I was reading and the chaos of the coffee shop. But when she left, she smiled again, and for the first time in months, I felt something other than anger or sadness. Hope. Her name was Emily. We ran into each other again a few weeks later, and this time we talked. Really talked. About books, movies, work, life. She was funny, sharp, and refreshingly honest. There was no pretense, no games, just a genuine connection that felt easy. It started with coffee, then dinner, then late-night phone calls that stretched into the early hours of the morning. I didn't tell her about Jenna or Tyler right away. Felt too heavy, too raw to bring into something so new. But when I finally did, she didn't flinch. "That's a lot to carry," she said softly. "But it sounds like you handled it the best you could." I nodded, unsure of what to say. "For what it's worth," she added, reaching across the table to take my hand. "You're not defined by what they did to you. You're more than that." Her words stuck with me, echoing in my mind long after the night ended. Emily didn't heal me. That was something I had to do for myself. But she helped me see that there was life after betrayal, that there was still good in the world worth holding on to. As we grew closer, I found myself laughing more, smiling without forcing it. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was happy. The scars of the past never fully faded. I still had moments of doubt, flashes of anger when I thought about Jenna and Tyler. But they were just that, moments. They didn't control me anymore. One evening, as Emily and I sat on the balcony watching the sunset, she turned to me and said, "You seem different, lighter." I smiled, taking her hand in mine. "That's because I finally let go. And I had. The betrayal, the anger, the pain. It was all part of my story, but it wasn't the whole story. The rest was still being written."